Hello everyone. Today's lecture will be on LCA of a PSS. So what we will discuss today is about the different viewpoints and different approaches which various researchers working in the field of LCA or PSS have taken on combining these two fields together. There is still no one guideline or framework on how to apply LCA to PSS. Hence, we will take this kind of a route. So, we will be discussing about the challenges of applying LCA to evaluate a PSS. That will give you an idea why there is lack of consensus. Then we will go to the elements of a LCA framework for PSS. Then we will take each of these elements and discuss the challenges of each of the elements because of the variation in which LCA was first conceptualized. So, LCA was conceptualized keeping in mind that of a evaluation system for products. Of course, in the definition, they by products they meant it could be products, it could be services. But the challenges in PSS come because there is a combination of products and services, and together they need to be evaluated. So, again a quick recap. We already know a PSS is an offer model providing an integrated mix of products and services that are together able to fulfill a particular demand of customer, that is a satisfaction, based on innovative interactions between the stakeholders of the value production system, that is the satisfaction system. So, here you can see an important component is the interaction between the stakeholders. So, we will discuss how this particular interaction between the stakeholders. Secondly, particular demand, which is the satisfaction, where the problem of defining the functional unit for the life cycle analysis comes in this particular lecture. So, again we have discussed that there were three types of PSS: the product oriented PSS, the use oriented PSS, the result oriented PSS. Since in the product oriented PSS, the product component is still very large as compared to the use oriented or the result oriented, the problems and the complexities involved in conducting an LCA keeps on changing across all these three typologies of PSS. So, PSS has the potential to reduce environmental impact. How is that achieved? Because it stresses the shift from individual or ownership based consumption towards satisfaction based consumption through the service economy. So, in our previous lectures, when we were talking about the MSDS methodology, we used the radar diagram. We used various matrices over there, all of them were qualitative matrices. To check the degree of environmental impact improvement or the social impact improvement or the economic impact improvement. So, now PSS although has a potential to reduce environmental impact because it is saying that no longer you have to produce too many products which is required in the case of individual consumption, but we move more towards the service industry. This particular model does not guarantee environmental impact will certainly get reduced. So, we discussed also this example where you get a mobile phone plus a finance plan plus a data plan. So, you have a product along with a service, but in this particular formulation of PSS, the provider has no incentive for building a long lasting mobile phone or a phone which can be recycled or a phone which is made of less toxic materials. So, although this is also a PSS offering, but it does not bring in environmental benefits. Hence, environmental benefits is not guaranteed. So, sustainability is not an intrinsic characteristic of PSS, it only offers higher potential. Now, how do we design it? That determines whether we can build in sustainability characteristics into PSS or not. So, our entire discussion on using the MSDS methodology will help you in trying to build in the various sustainability parameters into a PSS. Now, at the end of using the MSDS methodology, we used a SDO toolkit to evaluate our design concepts. This is a qualitative evaluation tool. Of course, it's a very useful tool because it gives you easy access and easy way to compare between the various parameters, check the improvements and worsening, but all these are qualitative evaluation. So, they are based on qualitative parameters, they are subjective. So, I might say that there has been an radical improvement in the transportation, or there has been a reduction in the distribution impact, but there might be others who might have a contrary way of looking at it, and all this way of looking at it is a subjective judgment at that point of time. None of them are quantitative judgment. This is also very hard to evaluate. So as we were discussing during the life cycle assessment design, you might assume that if a product is made up of bamboo, it is more environmentally friendly, but only when you do an LCA you might better be able to quantitatively say that in a given context, for the given system boundary, for the given scope, reference system and functional unit, whether bamboo as a material is a more environmentally friendly solution or plastic or ceramic and so on. So, similarly in this qualitative evaluation, because we are only doing qualitative evaluation, it is very difficult to evaluate. Of course, you can bring in lots of stakeholders who have some degree of expertise in that particular field, and when many of them evaluate your design, you can still say that because it has been evaluated by a team composed of lot of experts, so there is higher degree of evaluation being correct, the chances is much higher, but a qualitative evaluation can never replace a quantitative evaluation, because a qualitative evaluation does not give us a detailed view of the results. It does not tell us the impact, environmental impact of each and every aspect in terms of say the carbon footprint or the eco burden and so on. Hence, it is very important to have some kind of quantitative evaluation as well. So, there comes the life cycle assessment method. So, as we discussed, the life cycle assessment method is a method to calculate the environmental burden of a product or a service. So, the basic calculation structure of LCA, it consists of, so you will have various processes. So, you have material processing, you have production, then the use phase, the maintenance and the recycling. And during each of these stages, you will have certain kinds of inputs which are energy, materials, and you will have certain kind of emissions to water, air and soil. So, when we start computing these elements separately, we will be able to calculate the environmental burden of a product or a service. So, LCA on PSS is still an emerging area of research. So, all those people who are going through this particular lecture series and are very excited about doing research in this particular domain, this is one very prospective research area, how to conduct a LCA on PSS. So, we will present the various viewpoints, the various challenges in this particular lecture to highlight these challenges. I will also present 3 case studies. I will present the research paper links to 3 case studies of applying LCA on PSS. All the 3 are meant for different kinds of contexts. That when if you go through all those papers, you will get an idea of the width of the spectrum, the various challenges and so on. So, as we discussed during our LCA lectures, the ISO 14040 2006 standard it says that LCA can be done for a product, and the product may be defined. So, you can define your product as any goods or service. So, as per this definition, I should not be having much problem. But unfortunately, not much research has been done on application of the LCA to services, and now we are talking about product plus services system together as a whole. So, methodological steps are same whether the function delivered is through products, services or combination of both. So, as per this particular definition of ISO 14040, the methodological steps should be same. But say for example, one point of difference which comes is, as we were discussing when we were discussing about doing the LCA of a PSS, we could take a cradle to grave, we could take a cradle to cradle, we could take a cradle to gate, we could do many different kinds of analysis. But say in the context of PSS, as we have already learned, the post production life cycle. So, in the use oriented or the result oriented PSS, the post production life stages are very important because the product is still owned by the company. So, clearly from this we know that already we cannot do a cradle to gate analysis. It does not make any sense. A cradle to grave or a cradle to cradle analysis only makes much better sense. Also, because in a PSS, since the post production life cycle stages are very important, there are a lot of complexities related to the systems mapping. Because as soon as the product enters into the use phase, a lot of uncertainties come which are not directly under the control of the providers. Say for example, if I am supposed to use the washing service, as soon as the service is put into the market and it enters the consumption phase, there can be many uncertainties related to what happens thereafter in the use during the use phase. Say for example, if there is a community washing machine and people start using that community washing machine, but in the meanwhile there are many such consumers who start complaining that what is going to happen about our washing machines which we have at home. We want this company to buy back all our washing machines and compensate us accordingly. So, this is an unexpected scenario. There are many expected scenarios, so you always try to build them in the system as different scenarios, but there can be completely unexpected scenarios which is even very difficult to imagine at the onset. So, PSS is more than a product plus service. That is where the whole challenge of applying LCA comes. So, in a PSS, value creation happens through the systemic integration of the product and service through strategic partnership, networks and stakeholder interactions. That is why we are saying that PSS is more than a product plus service. So, there are many strategic partner networks and stakeholder interactions. Say for example, I want to offer a particular washing service. The washing service is going to come to your house. Now, as per my PSS design, imagine that the washing service uses the electricity connection from my home. What it offers me is per unit of it offers me washing services, and I pay on the basis of say number of clothes that I wash or the weight of the clothes that I wash and so on. There could be many parameters which could be set, but it still uses the electricity connection from my house. So, which means it is using the grid electricity, which also means that it depends on the fact whether at the time when they came to my house to offer that particular service, the electricity connection should be up. There are times when during the daytime or during the night in our country when there is no power at home, at our homes. So, you can see that in this particular context, in a PSS offering, you are offering is dependent not only on internal strategic partners that you have built, but it also depends on all those support services whom you will be using. Or say for example, in order to reach my PSS to your home, I might be using the internet service or the mobile network service. So, I will be involving lot of strategic partners and lot of stakeholder interactions. So, the value creation is created with, in a combined manner with all of these stakeholders together. So, it is an integration of the product technology with the socio-technical system which is already in place. It consists of several functions and sub-functions. As a result of the fact that it is a combination of products and services along with a interesting strategic partnership network, stakeholder interaction, product technology with socio-technical systems, I might be offering actually several functionalities and sub-functionalities. See, again coming back to this example of washing clothes. Say in one part I design a particular PSS, so my satisfaction unit remains same. My satisfaction unit is I want clean clothes. So I can design many different types of PSS around it. Say for example, first PSS that I designed is a service which comes to your house and you can give the clothes, and depending on your clothes, depending on your requirements, this person washes the clothes in your own house and gives you the clean clothes. This person might be using the electricity and the water connection of the house itself and offering this particular service. Now, what I am getting in this case? My function 1 is of course clean clothes, that is the most important function. Now, if I say talk about the sub functionalities, I am getting this service available to me at my doorstep. So, there is a sub functionality added over there, that clean clothes at your doorstep, where I do not have to go anywhere. Now, say this PSS could also have been designed in a manner that this particular solution provider comes with a setup which has its own electricity generation or the power generation source, whatever it might be. It might be solar, it might be diesel generated power, whatever. It also has its own water supply, and it also has its machines for cleaning the clothes. So, all I have to do is give the clothes and I get back clean clothes at my doorstep. Again, you can see that the functions and the sub functions are changing. Now, I could also have a wash bar, as we saw the LG wash bar example. So, it's a local cafe where I can go take my clothes. Until my clothes are getting washed, I can enjoy the coffee shop. I can also engage into social chatting with my friends or with strangers. I can also play some games over there. Again, the main functionality, the satisfaction unit remains same, but it has add-on advantages. It has other functionalities like a social setting. It also offers you coffee, and it can also be a place for entertainment. So, now sub functionalities are changing. So, I had the same satisfaction unit, but I can offer different PSS around it. Each one can be a sustainable PSS. But since each one of them are different in terms of their functions and sub functionalities, if you recall the functional unit or the concept of declared unit from the LCA lectures, you will find that that's the major challenge in applying LCA to PSS, because the functions and the sub functionalities can change, and it might become very difficult to set a equivalence value for each of them. So, you can go through this particular paper, challenges when evaluating product service systems through life cycle assessment. This paper in detail lists out all these different challenges. They also have references to many other papers where people have tried to apply LCA to product service systems under different contexts, and they have followed different strategies to do the same. So, some of the major challenges that we face when we are trying to apply LCA to PSS are, in the context of PSS, because it's a combination of products, services along with strategic partnerships between various stakeholders, we have many foreground systems and background systems. Foreground systems, the providers have control over them, it is located within the providers, and the background systems are those which are outside the control system of the providers. So, say like the road network, the infrastructure network, the administrative aspects and so on. So, because the system boundary becomes very big, so the amount of information required to do the analysis is very high, the resources required is very high, and we have to consider the large number of interactions across the life stages. We also cannot ignore any of the life stages. We cannot do, for the sake of simplicity, say cradle to gate. We have to take into account the entire life cycle. Otherwise, so the benefit of a PSS comes only through the entire life cycle. So, all these are required for conducting the environmental impact audit of a PSS. So, this increases the level of complexity that we have to deal with and also the diversity. So, the complexity also increases in another aspect, which is allocation of the impact to actors of the value chain. So, if you remember from the LCA lectures that we went through, allocation of the impacts to actors was way much more easier. Here in this case, because of the network of actors built in, allocation of the impacts also becomes more difficult than that in the case of a product. There is also lack of any standard guidelines or frameworks to gather necessary information to support the LCA methodology for PSS at this given moment. So, that becomes an interesting area where further research can be conducted. Presence of contrasting viewpoints of PSS, which has more focus on economic aspects, and LCA, which has more focus on environmental aspects, is also there. So, PSS experts and LCA experts, they have certain contrasting viewpoints also on how to perform this evaluation, this environmental evaluation. So, why I am talking about the economic aspect in PSS? So, if you remember the definition of PSS that we said, it was like an offer model in which it is in the economic interest of the providers to be economically and socially sustainable. Also for the consumers, because a PSS always demands certain kind of behavior change in terms of consumption. So, for the consumers also, the economic aspect becomes very important. They might not want to go ahead with a PSS in cases where the initial investment or the recurring investments are way much higher than that in the ownership based model. So, in amongst the PSS experts, a major focus lies on the economic aspects, both from the provider as well as the customer perspective. Whereas in the LCA, amongst the LCA experts, the focus on the environmental aspects are way much higher. So, let us discuss the elements that are required for this guidelines or framework for conducting LCA on a PSS. So, these are the same elements that we discussed when we were discussing our how to conduct a life cycle assessment. So, we have to have scope, we have to define the functional unit, the system boundaries, service related inventory, PSS reference system and the end conditions. So, let us pick up each of these elements and see how they are done and the challenges that we face. So, there are three kind of scopes when we try to do an LCA of a PSS. The first one is called as PSS optimization, second one is PSS comparison and the third one is PSS consequences. So, what happens in PSS optimization? In this particular context, we take one PSS and we try to, in that same PSS, we try to identify where are the different hotspots, where are the major environmental issues, and we try to evaluate different options. This is the easiest context. Why? Because in this case, the system boundary remains constant, the functional unit remains constant, the sub functionalities remain constant. What we try to do is optimize this particular PSS by identifying the hotspots and evaluating different options. If you are interested in seeing an example of applying this kind of applying LCA to this kind of a PSS where you are trying to do optimization, you can read this paper. It talks about contribution to eco design of machine to machine product service system with the example of a waste glass collection. Next one, the PSS comparison. Here I am trying to compare alternatives. As soon as I try to compare alternative PSS, so these can be comparison with respect to alternate PSS possible, or also with respect to traditional way of doing business, that is a product oriented business. So, what I have to do over here is I will be evaluating two or more predefined alternatives which fulfill the same function but in different ways. A major challenge over here comes on the same function, because defining the same function, as I gave you the example of the clean clothes service, it's very difficult. Setting up this equivalence is very difficult. Again, in this case also, if you want to know more about this particular technique, so there has been an evaluation between conditioned air and air conditioner. So, air conditioner is the product model and conditioned air is the service model, and this paper presents to you a particular technique of doing LCA in which you compare a product offering versus a PSS offering. The third one is the PSS consequences. In this case, you are talking about a baseline situation without the PSS. So, what it tries to do is evaluates how the environmental impact of the system changes as a result of the introduction of the PSS. As soon as you read this statement, you can see that it is a very predictive model, because the changes can happen in many different directions and the degree of change to each of them can also vary. It also evaluates what is being substituted by the system. Say for example, if I bring in a car sharing system, what all it can have an impact on? It might have an impact on the metros, it might have an impact on the trains, it might have an impact on intercity travel, it might have an impact on travel by walking, it might also have an impact on traveling by bicycle. So, in this PSS consequence, we are trying to evaluate the environmental impact of the system changes as a result of the introduction of the PSS, which is only a probabilistic way of looking at it, because I do not know what all systems it will substitute and to what degree it will substitute. Another aspect which comes over here very importantly is the rebound effect. Say for example, now I do not have to own a car, because I can take this car sharing service. So, from traveling point A to point B, which I would have otherwise gone by my bicycle or I would have walked, I might decide, okay, the cost of getting a shared or a rental car is very low at this location or in my city. Why should I care to walk, or why should I care to use my bicycle? Let me take a shared car. Now, say if you are you have to travel to the local train station, and the local train station is only 2 kilometers away. Earlier you would have taken a public transportation like a bus. Now you are going to take this shared cab service. So, at the train station this might increase a lot of congestion due to cars. Also, because rather than using buses which are mass transportation services, I am going to use cars which will take lesser number of people or only say just me from point A to point B. So, what I am getting over here is a environmental rebound effect. Traffic congestion as well as maybe increased ecological footprint, because rather than using a bus or rather than walking, I am going to use this cab service. So, in these PSS consequence measurement, if the scope of it is that, it is very difficult to even imagine all the possible rebound effects, because they will depend on how people consume, how people change their needs once this particular new PSS is introduced. So, you can go through this particular paper, what will be the environmental effects of new free floating car sharing systems. It discusses the same context. It also discusses a possible way of doing a life cycle assessment when you are trying to when your scope of work is PSS consequences. So, some of the challenges in scope and reference systems is, so there are at times difficulties in comparing a PSS solution against a traditional offer, a product ownership based offer. Say for example, if I want to compare a washing machine versus a clean cloth offering service. Because of the size of the system, because of the all the usage related, maintenance related uncertainties and scenarios, it becomes very difficult to compare them. It is not that it is impossible to compare it, but the comparisons are always like on the basis of scenarios of usage, and you might have to compare many scenarios of usage, and in actual practice the actual scenario might be very different. That is a possibility. It is difficult to anticipate the possible rebound effects due to the PSS. So, say for example, I gave you a very imaginary rebound effect due to the washing machine or due to the car sharing service. When you are doing this LCA of the PSS, you try to think of as many possible rebound effects as you can, but not necessarily you can predict the exact rebound effect. These might lead to undesirable environmental impacts also at many times. It is also difficult to anticipate. Also be aware that even when you are doing an LCA of a product, because you cannot really ensure what happens to the product when it reaches the user's end, you do not have really a good control over the end of life also in that particular case. Those calculations are also scenario based, but the number of possibilities in the context of PSS increases exponentially as compared to that in the case of a product. The next challenge is, it is difficult to anticipate the substitutions and degree of substitutions due to the introduction of the PSS. So, how many people will substitute their current washing machine into a better solution? Or if they are going to do that, are they going to discard away their washing machines? Are they going to send it to a scrap dealer? Are they going to sell it in a second hand market? Or they are going to keep it in their house to use in case the service they could not access the service on certain day and time because of any other reason. If you have a car sharing service, it is difficult to anticipate to what degree it will substitute the current public transportation or the desire to own your own vehicle. And those aspects need to be mapped when you are doing the scope and the reference system, and your LCA calculations depends on them in a big way. So, you are always considering scenarios. Okay, if 10% of substitution happens, 20% of substitution happens. Since PSS diffusion depends a lot on consumer behavior change, further uncertainties crop in. Changes in consumption patterns and practices can lead to changes in users' needs, leading to possible rebound effects. We also discussed about that. So, this is difficult to anticipate and model in the scope and the reference system. You will always model some of them, but you can never be sure, you can never claim that these are the only possible rebound effects. The next element is the functional unit. So, the functional unit in case of our product, it used to be the functionality of the product. So, we had defined the functionality of a coffee machine as per cup of coffee. For the case of 5 cups of coffee a day, where the coffee pods are coming from Thailand to India. So, that was how we defined the functional unit in the context of a product's life cycle assessment. In the context of the PSS, the functionality of the system has to be that of the product plus the system. As a result, all the problems, because it is very difficult to associate one functionality to it. So, whenever I have this first scope, which is the PSS optimization of a existing PSS design, what we are trying to do is the functional unit in that case is the function of the PSS. This is still a more easy to handle context, because the functionality of the whole system, because we are doing only identifying the hotspots and doing design changes at the hotspots. So, the function of the PSS and the sub functionalities are most likely going to remain more or less same, or that is, setting the equivalence value is very much easier as compared to the PSS comparison and PSS consequence. In PSS comparison, where we are trying to compare alternatives, first what I have to do is functional equivalence between compared systems, including the main functions as well as the sub functions. So, like all the different ways in which I can offer the satisfaction unit of clean clothes that we discussed, they all have different functions. So, the wash bar has a different set of functions plus sub functionalities. The washing service which comes to your home and delivers you the service, or say a washing machine owned by the entire building, they offer you the same satisfaction unit, but the main functions and the sub functionalities are different. So, I have to try to establish some kind of functional equivalence both between the functions and the sub functions. In case it is not possible, then we cannot compare two PSS for doing an LCM. This does not imply that you will not design PSS with different kinds of functional and sub-functional options, just because you want to do a life cycle assessment. Today's lecture is purely from the perspective what are the life cycle assessment difficulties. This does not imply that you design the PSS in a manner that you can do LCM. That's not the aim. Then we have to also establish equivalence in terms of quality, which is the perceived value. As a consumer, I will see a different value to the wash bar as compared to a service in which there is a doorstep washing service, as compared to the self-help or do-it-yourself service which is available in your building basement. So, where nobody is offering you, no person is doing it for you, you go put your clothes as per your convenience and availability of the washing machine and get clean clothes. So, the quality and the perceived value in each of these PSS design is different. So, again there is a problem. If that is the case, we cannot do a comparison of LCA between all these PSS, because the functional unit is different. Hence, to do it, in case when we want to do it, we have to see that there is sufficient amount of equivalence in terms of quality. Discrepancies in perceived value should be listed and evaluated in regards to potential rebound effects. The last one is the PSS consequences. So, it has things which are same as the PSS comparison, plus here you have to have a broader definition of the functional unit, which includes all relevant substitutes, behavioral changes and changes in other affected systems. So, it's the setting up of the functional unit is the most difficult task in the context of a PSS. Some researchers suggest that rather than trying to set a functional unit, like you remember we set a declared unit also in case of certain products, say like jewelry, shoes, clothes, where functional unit does not make much sense because they are bought on the basis of the perceived value offered by these particular products. We had this concept of declared unit. Similarly, some researchers argue that in the context of PSS also, we rather than having functional unit, we can compare PSS on the basis of the satisfaction unit or the perceived value. But even when you say that, even implementing that is very difficult, because again the sub-satisfactions in the example of the wash bar are so very different. So, they will have different values, but still because we are comparing on the basis of eco cost or value model. So, satisfaction unit or the value based model, they will follow the eco cost or value model. So, we will be in a better off situation than just the functional unit. So, let us discuss some of the challenges in describing the functional unit. So, as we already discussed, it might include multiple functions, whereas in LCA the definition of LCA goes by single functional unit. So, there is a methodological clash. There is also variance in large number of sub functionalities, even if you ensure that the even if you ensure equivalence at the functional level, at the sub functionality level, when you are trying to compare alternative PSS or you are trying to do a PSS consequence, at the sub functionalities level, the setting the equivalence is very difficult, way much higher variance is available. Equivalence needs to be set for any sort of comparison. PSS affect user behavior and include intangible elements. These are the challenges in setting functional equivalence between alternatives. So, I will see different things in a different services, all the different wash services, I see them in a different manner. Functional unit should be defined broadly to counter this challenge and then include possible rebound effects, which is another additional challenge while we are trying to do a life cycle assessment, because each of these sub functionalities, so the home delivery clean clothes has very different sort of rebound effect possibilities as compared to the wash bar, as compared to the building level washing service. So, the eco cost or value model can be an alternative way. Here what you are trying to do is you take the perceived value differentials and you can compare the PSS. It also enlarges what we mean by similar offerings. So, it also helps in setting the perceived value in terms of similar offerings. Certain rebound effects can be accommodated in a better manner when we look using this particular model. Now, the third and the last element, the system boundary. So, for a PSS, the system boundary consists of two systems, the foreground and the background system. So, the foreground system, it consists of all the processes within management of the PSS provider. So, in case of this wash bar, so the company who is say the washing machine company owns the washing machine. They also set up the washing bar, so the space is also owned by them. They might be offering the games and the drinks which are provided by yet another manufacturer. So, we will define a certain set of providers in this case. So, in this particular functionality, say the electricity is provided by somebody on whom the provider does not have much control. Then I put this particular provider as a background system. How does this have an effect? Say for example, you locate this wash bar in a place where there are frequent power cuts. Your wash bar has to work irrespective of the fact whether the municipality at that point of time is giving in power to the locality or not. So, in that context, my provider might have to also set up a small power generation unit in their premises, which ensures that the washing machine is working all the time. So, in this background system, because the PSS provider did not have much control or decisive influence on the, say, the power company or the municipality through whom the power is coming to your setup. So, I had to do certain changes into my foreground system. I had to build in this particular electricity generating unit in house. So, when we are talking about the system boundary in the context of PSS, we will talk about the foreground system, which are processes within the management of the PSS provider, and we will be talking about background systems, which are operated as part of the system but not under the PSS provider's direct control or decisive influence. This might include all sorts of infrastructure, say roads, electricity, educational setups, and so on. It might also include things like administrative services, law and order, depending on what your PSS is about. So, let us again go to each of those scope definition and see how the system boundary definition changes. So, when we are talking about PSS optimization, that is the within the existing PSS, in this particular case the system boundary is all contributing flows plus processes in the background system. So, all the foreground plus the background system. Let us go to the next one, PSS comparison. So, again I have all the foreground, all the background system plus the aspects to cover the compared systems. Because as soon as I try to compare two systems, there will be differences in the stakeholders. There will be little differences, say in the boundary conditions from for both the context. So, I have to bring in aspects in both the system boundaries so that I can compare the both the systems. Similarly, when I am talking about the PSS consequences, I have something similar like the PSS comparison. I will have the foreground flows, the background flows, and the aspects to cover the compared systems. So, when I start doing all the foreground plus the background plus aspects to cover the compared systems, that adds a lot of complexities. So, let us discuss some challenges of system boundary definition. So, challenges in establishing the system boundary due to heavy reliance on supporting systems. So, I have a huge reliance on the background systems because it is like product plus service, and I have to rely on all these background services which are going to help me in being able to deliver my PSS. So, setting this system boundary becomes very difficult. Like, where do I say that this is my boundary? Should I include the rail network? Should I include the nuclear power plants in the country? Should I also consider the say the electricity grid of two countries are connected? Should I consider this whole system as a whole? So, setting the system boundary is little difficult in this particular context. For the foreground system, primary data for LCA is more useful. If you remember, when we were doing the LCA analysis of the product, we did quick LCA, in which context we were using data from the databases. So, whenever you are using the background system, which is like the existing infrastructure or administration, it is okay to use the secondary data from LCA databases. But for the primary data, which is like the all the processes which are maintained by the providers, you might have to actually go for primary data, which means you will have to involve some kind of LCA expert who can calculate the impacts for the given set of design that you have done. So, a hybrid approach is most likely required. Thus, you might need higher investment of time, money as well as expertise in this context. Also, since PSS is a design strategy, multiple scenarios needs to be considered. So, in case of the product LCA, we considered couple of scenarios. Say in the case when the coffee pots are coming from Thailand to India. In the case when the coffee machine is made in China and shipped to India. But in the context of PSS, you can just, because there are so many components, you can come up with multiple scenarios. So, the number of scenarios to be considered in the system boundary is very, very large. Since PSS relies heavily on supporting products and services, so these supporting products and services are the background system consisting of infrastructure, transportation, maintenance programs, administration and so on. These needs to be considered in the system boundary and will have significant impact on the environmental evaluation of the PS. So, in case you miss on to any of them, it can lead to inaccuracies. So, mapping all of them is a challenge, and in case you miss them, you can get in a lot of inaccuracies, which can give you a false feeling that the service model is more environmentally friendly, which might not be case, because to even to produce a service you need products and infrastructure which have high environmental impact. There are many other challenges. So, say for example, like in the LCA for products, we had a way of doing system expansion when we have a byproduct. So, in this particular case also, in PSS also, you might get something called as the co-product or the byproduct. So, in case of a product, we call it byproduct, here we call it as co-product. It becomes more challenging to accommodate the co-product in, because already the system boundary is extremely complex. Also, your system might be multifunction system. How do we do different allocations to different actors is a big problem. System expansion due to recycling and reuse, they actually give the PSS its sustainability orientation in a big way. But doing the system expansion due to recycling or reuse and doing the calculation with respect to that is extremely complex, and it is usually advised not to do that. And then your whole point, whole sustainability crux is lost to a big extent. Similarly, potential extensions to multiple life cycles, that is what a PSS offers, but computing that, representing that in the system boundary is very difficult. So, all these things lead to inaccuracies, increase in complexities as well as uncertainties. So, because of these aspects, it gives us a huge scope for doing research in this area and coming up with appropriate ways of doing LCA. So, to summarize this particular lecture, what we can say is LCA is an important tool to evaluate the environmental performance of a PSS quantitatively, and it is very important to do the same. But as we discussed, the challenges to application exist due to the current procedural stages of life cycle assessment, because the procedural stages of life cycle assessments were developed keeping in mind a product. It did not, it was not designed thinking in mind product plus services along with all the interactions between different stakeholders. So, that's why also another challenge which came up, the setting the functional unit of a LCA. So, in the LCA approach, setting the functional unit is based on a single functional unit compared over multiple alternate systems, which is not the case with the PSS. Hence, the scope for appropriate equivalent of defining a functional unit can be worked out. So, some researchers suggest the use of satisfaction unit or customer perceived value as the unit of evaluation rather than functional unit. So, hope you had a good understanding of what are the challenges of implementing LCA on a PSS and why it also gives you an idea why not much work has been done in that domain, but more and more PSS evaluation on its sustainability performance has been done qualitatively. A qualitative tool is a good tool and can be used, but to get actual numbers on the environmental parameters, a better LCA approach can be developed. So, in our next lectures, in our next week we will start discussing about other design for sustainability tools and approaches, which will be coming from the field of distributed economy, architecture, agriculture, cities and communities, and about carbon footprint. Thank you so much.